Let's take a look at Docker installation instructions on the Mac. The installation procedure will be done in steps. First, you will download the code samples for exercises. Then, you will install Visual Studio Code and with the Docker plugin on Visual Studio Code. And the third one covers installing Docker. Now let's get started. Now let us take a look at Docker installation on the Mac. The first thing we are going to do is to install the code samples. The code samples will help you progress through the upcoming lectures. Go to www.github.com/pic-to-learn, navigate to the Docker tutorial project and download the zip file. Now let's see how we can do that. In order to download the code samples, go to github.com/pic-to-learn. Go to the Docker tutorial section, click on the clone or download link and download the zip file. Go ahead and uncompress zip file. After you uncompress it, move to a location of your choice. Now let's see how we can install Visual Studio Code. Google on Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a project written to work on all operating systems by Microsoft, and it's basically an editor. And it can be used with the Docker plugin to work on Docker projects. Now let's take a look at how to download Visual Studio Code. Google for Visual Studio Code. You should be able to download the one for your operating system from here. If you don't find it out here, you can click on the top right hand corner where it says download. Download it for the Mac. Unzip the file. Double click on it and it'll say open. You should be able to see an editor like this. Search for Docker. If it's not installed, you will see an icon to say install it. I apparently already installed it once. So it would usually ask you to install it and restart. So after you're done restarting it, click on open folder, go into desktop, go into the application sample and click open. And you should see all of the use cases in here. We're going to work with these samples. Now let's take a look at how we can install Docker. To install Docker, go to docker.com and download the community edition for your respective operating system. Let's take a look at how to download Docker. Go into docker.com, click on Get Docker Community Edition. You can also get Docker from here. Go to Get Docker C from Docker Store. And you should see one for Mac OS X. Get Docker. Save file. I probably already have Docker. But nevertheless, once Docker is downloaded, double click on the DMG file, drag it to the applications folder, go to the applications folder, look for Docker, double click on it, say open, and you should see that there is an icon coming up here. This is nothing but the Docker daemon. It's starting up right now. So without the Docker daemon, Docker will not work. So Docker is running right now, so I recommend opening up a terminal. Just do Docker version. It should tell you the version of the client and the server it is using. It is experimental because it's community edition. As it says, it's -CE. This is the server, this is the client. I'll go over the difference between the Docker client, the Docker server, and the Docker daemon. I also want to show you the usage of how to use the Docker daemon. So as you can see, there are multiple options here. Kitematic is one of the options which we are not going to cover. Check for updates, Docker Store, preferences. I have unchecked Start Docker when you log in, just because of performance reasons. File sharing, I will go over it as and when we go through the lectures. Advanced talks to you about the virtual machine which is in use when you install Docker. Typically it's called boot to Docker. This tells you that Docker is using 4 CPUs with 2 gigs of RAM. Depending on your development requirements, this can be changed. Proxies, I'm just going to leave it as use system proxy. Daemon, as you can see, it's got a basic and advanced section. You can configure the docker.conf file, but from a perspective of advanced usage, we're not going to talk about it in this lecture series. Reset, if you want to make changes to already existing changes and get it back to the factory version, I would just click on reset, and then you can uninstall it or reset to factory defaults. I highly recommend using the uninstall method from here so that it removes all of your settings correctly. All right then, so that's Docker installation for you. Now let's get started with our first act of playing with Docker. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Okay, let's get started. Open up a terminal and execute the following command. I'm going to show you in the upcoming video as well, but this is just a PowerPoint for reference in case you want to download it. This will help you understand the interaction of Docker client which you're running on the terminal. Now let's check it out. We're going to do one more test to make sure Docker has been installed correctly. So what I would do is, just like we have the Hello World application in all programming languages, we will do docker run-it hello-world. It is pulling up down the information from the Docker image in the repository. So it says unable to find image locally, which means it was unable to find an image locally. You will have a better understanding of this when we go through the lectures. In this case, it's pulling the Hello World image from the DockerHub or the repository. As you can see, pull is complete. It says hello from Docker. So I highly recommend reading this. This is going to give you an idea of the Docker client and the Docker daemon. It says the Docker client contacted the Docker daemon. The Docker daemon pulled the Hello World imager from DockerHub. The Docker daemon created a new container from that image which runs the executable that produces the output you're currently reading. The Docker daemon streamed that output to the Docker client which sent it to your terminal. So I highly recommend reading through these steps a few times. This is very important to understand the life cycle of how Docker works. This will give you a clear synopsis of the difference between the Docker client and the Docker daemon. It also clarifies what a Docker Hub is. As you know, Docker Hub is a repository of all the images. So it's like Maven having all the repos of the jar files. So just like that, we have a repo for Hello World, and that's what is being done by the Docker client. So when we run Docker version, we are inherently running the Docker client, and we are calling the Docker daemon, and the Docker daemon gives you back the information.